All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is part 2 of our 2-part webinar series with Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis and Crime Stoppers Guelph Wellington, exploring the realities and resources of domestic violence. So this is our second session, and we thank you all so much for joining us this evening virtually. We've got a great lineup of programming this evening, but before we get started, I just wanted to lead us in a brief land acknowledgement. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these treaty lands are steeped in rich Indigenous histories and modern traditions. As a community, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the 4 directions: land, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and for those of us joining from Guelph Wellington region, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, on whose land some of us may be joining from this evening. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It's important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land and to seek to understand your place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context, as colonialism is a current and ongoing process, and we need to be mindful of our present participation. Allies must continuously work to engage in self-reflection and work at being an ally through learning, committing to decolonization, and sustaining relationships with Indigenous peoples. So in terms of what we have going on tonight, we've got a great lineup of programming for the next hour for you folks. We're going to have a discussion about the barriers that women experiencing abuse face when accessing support services, getting to know the warning signs for domestic violence, how to provide support to those who've experienced domestic violence, and then we'll be highlighting some services that are local to the Guelph Wellington region that support survivors through different ways. We'll have myself from Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis. We'll have Victim Services Wellington from Elizabeth Kent speaking, and from Wellington County OPP, we'll have Detective Sergeant Karen Ashmore and Detective Sergeant Christine Milson. As well from Guelph Police, we have Detective Constable Ashley MacArthur joining. And from Crime Stoppers Guelph Wellington, we have Sarah Bowers-Peter, and I'll let Sarah quickly introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Jensen. Yes, it's a wonderful opportunity for 2 community organizations to come together and help increase awareness. I'm really looking forward to the content we're going to be sharing this evening and answering some questions that I know are commonly held within the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. So tonight is really designed to help you folks understand how you as individuals can be a resource to those in your life who may be experiencing domestic violence, as well as getting to know some of the resources that are available in the community. But it's important to understand that women face the greatest risk of violence when they're attempting to leave abuse. As we mentioned a lot in our first session, partners in abusive relationships and abusers utilize power and control and isolating tactics to force dependency on abusers in many ways, and using that power and control in attempts to keep their partner with them and under their control. And we know that these tactics escalate when individuals are trying to leave that relationship, which is why the average woman in an abusive relationship will make up to 5 attempts to leave before ending the relationship. And so often we hear the rhetoric of, well, why doesn't she just leave? Or if it's so bad, she would just get help. But the reality is, for many women in abusive relationships, they don't want the relationship to end. They just want the abuse to stop. And there's many reasons and consideration that could prevent someone from leaving, such as the utilization of fear and threats. So things such as, if you leave, I will cause harm to you, your children, your pets, your property, your loved ones. Stigma, as we mentioned in our first session, domestic violence is still seen as a taboo and private matter. Severity, so some may think it's not serious enough, and abusers also utilize tactics to have their partner believe that they're getting better and that they will change. Living situation as well. Do they have shared housing? Are their children involved? And we know, as we mentioned in our first session, that these barriers have only increased with COVID, as it's no longer as easy to stay with a friend, to access safe housing. We know that shelters have lowered their capacities to accommodate for social distancing and isolation. And with job and economic losses, these make it harder to afford basic necessities as well. So when we talk about warning signs, it's important to recognize that warning signs aren't always obvious and they're not always visible, such as bruises, as we know that violence is not always physical. Some warning signs are individuals may be nervous when they're around their partner or acting differently. You may notice that you're not seeing someone as often at work, at social events. You may notice that someone has personality changes when they're with their partner, and when they're without their partner, they may be checking their phone, in constant contact with their partner. You may be seeing them have low self-esteem or changes in their appearance. These are just a few. So how to support someone who's experiencing domestic violence? And I will preface by saying that some of these suggestions are based on if a disclosure has taken place and you've been made to be aware of the violence, and some are better if you're concerned but maybe unsure exactly of what's going on. A really crucial piece in this is believing them. It can be really tempting to want to jump in and offer advice, but it's really important to hear the person out and believe their story. Let them set the pace in the conversation and tell you as little or as much as they want to tell you about the situation. And do not make suggestions about how the abuse could have prevented, as we know that those who are abused are never at fault for what happens to them. Reminding them that they're not alone, thank them for trusting you with the information that they've shared, and remind them that you care about their safety and you're there to support them, but that you can't be their only support and you're here to help them access other supports in the community. Ask about their immediate safety. While it's understandable to want to know all of the details of what's going on, it's really important to focus your questions, and it's more helpful to focus your question on asking about their safety, such as, do you feel safe at home right now, or what do you need to feel safe? Asking about their plans. Remember that those who are being abused are the experts of their own lives and experiences. They know when it's safe for them to leave and when they are met with risk and fear. So you could ask them questions about their goals and plans, such as, are you interested in making a change? Do you want to stay with this person? What have you thought about doing? And follow their lead as much as you can to help them fulfill their own goals. Respect their boundaries and recognize them as the expert of their own experiences. So avoid making decisions on their own, on their behalf, as being abused can result in a real profound loss of power and control. And you can help them regain power and control over their lives by allowing them to make their own decisions about what to do next. Checking in from time to time, this is a really important one. Don't be afraid to ask how things are going. If they've had some plans that they've addressed with you, ask how their plans are going. As well, with COVID, checking in can be hard, as this is something that we might normally be able to do in person. If someone is experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and having their digital devices monitored and it's harder to reach them, you might have to think of creative ways of checking in, such as utilizing coded messages to indicate when someone's safe, when someone's in danger, etc. And knowing what resources are available in the community. And that's really what this session is all about, because as individuals, it's important to recognize your limitations in being able to provide support, but knowing what supports are available in the community. And I'm going to quickly turn it to Sarah to mention a resource that she's become aware of with legal aid.
Yes, one of our members of our board of directors is a paralegal, and she wanted me to bring forward some information for anyone who might be in need, that until further notice, eligibility requirements that will be waived for anyone experiencing domestic violence that needs the following legal aid services. And there's an entire list of those services and how to go about applying for that support by using the link on the screen there. So if you'd like to grab a screenshot of that so you can have it for future reference. I thought that was a very timely submission for this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for highlighting that, Sarah. So now we're going to go through some of the resources that are available to you folks in the community. And I'm going to start with talking about the organization that I work with, which is Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis. So Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis is a feminist community-based organization that provides free, confidential, and trauma-informed services to those who have or are experiencing gender-based violence, with a focus on sexual, domestic violence, and human trafficking. In terms of how we do our work, we have a feminist-based approach. So we meet people where they're at and we go at their own pace and try to create a sense of equality amongst service providers and clients. And we also recognize that because there's no one way to react to trauma, we provide a wraparound service approach to meet the unique and different needs of each client. And a lot of that involves collaborating with other community service providers, such as the lovely people that we have here this evening. As well, centering the survivor in our work is really crucial to what we do by believing their experiences and providing them with supports based on what they are seeking and empower them to have agency over their own lives and decisions by walking alongside them in their journey and to helping to advocate for those who can't always advocate for themselves and acting as a supportive voice to help them overcome barriers that may be preventing them from living violence-free lives. A little bit about the services that we offer. We have Marianne's Place, which is our emergency shelter to provide safe and accessible housing to those where home is not always a safe place and they cannot access alternative housing. And this also helps connect folks to independent long-term housing supports as well. With COVID-19, we are an essential service. Our shelter is still open, but operating at a reduced capacity to accommodate social distancing measures. And our capacity varies on the family size as folks need to have their own bathroom. So it really depends on where we're able to take, but we normally in non-COVID times have 28 beds. And as well in our Marianne's Place houses our 24-hour crisis line. And our 24-hour crisis line provides immediate connection to support a listening ear and connections to programs and services within our agency, as well as referrals and connections to other community agencies in the community. At our main office, which is on Elizabeth Street in Guelph, we have a couple different resources and services that are located there, such as our Sexual Assault Center, which provides therapeutic trauma counseling for those who've experienced any form of sexual violence, including childhood sexual abuse. And we provide as well practical assistance, advocacy, referrals, and accompaniments. And through the Sexual Assault Center, we also provide support and information for friends and families of sexual violence survivors. We also have our transitional and housing support program, and primarily this program supports those who are experiencing intimate partner violence. So for women who are in abusive relationships or have been in the past. And this provides a high focus on safety planning. So creating a plan with a counselor around actions that individuals can take to protect their safety and that of their children. And safety planning is a top priority, whether they choose to remain in the home or leave. I think that's really an important thing that I wanted to drive home is that you don't have to leave to seek help. And making a safety plan really just involves identifying actions to increase their safety and to prepare them for a variety of situations that may arise. And through the Transitional and Housing Support Program, it also helps connect to social supports that help women live independent, violence-free lives, such as Ontario Works, mental health and addictions programs, harm reduction supports, and access to housing, very importantly. We also work in Wellington County, so we know that those in the county may experience unique barriers when it comes to accessing services. So we have 4 different locations that we serve in Erin, Fergus, Palmerston, and Mount Forest. And this is really providing an amalgamation of services that we offer through our various programs in Guelph, such as counseling, individual and group counseling, assistance with housing, collaborating with other community service providers, court preparations, and connections to Marianne's Place. Our family court support program as well is for those who are experiencing or have experienced abuse and have started the family court process or are thinking of starting. And this helps navigate custody and access issues, helping to gather evidence to compile paperwork to demonstrate a history of abuse, helps with referrals to lawyers and safety planning when it comes to court procedures. We also have our anti-human trafficking program, which provides a wide range of services to those who have or are experiencing human trafficking, such as counseling, risk assessment and safety planning, referrals, practical assistance, as well as for the community, we provide public education and violence prevention, which is also my program in public education, which is around engaging community members and involving community members in this work, recognizing that every individual has a role to play in preventing violence, and the more we know, the more we're able to do to help the situations. In terms of how folks can get connected to our services, there's a couple different ways that folks can do that. As I mentioned, we have our 24-hour crisis line. Our phone number is there for folks who are seeking immediate assistance. And it's important to know that anyone can call our crisis line, so service providers, friends and families, those seeking support, and we have no call display and there's no need to give any identifying information as well. For those who are just seeking general information and access to services, our administrative line number is on there as well. And we're currently working on developing a text line so folks can be able to communicate with our service providers through text as well. In terms of how you can support our work, financial and gift card donations give us the most flexibility at the moment to be able to provide practical assistance. At the moment, we're also engaging in a phone drive with the Guelph Community Health Center and some other community partners to help folks get access to digital devices that can help them better access online services. So if you have a used but working phone or used but working cell phone chargers, you can drop those off to our office at 38 Elizabeth Street. Mentioning our resources to those who you feel may benefit and have resources in your workplace, as well as booking us for workshops and trainings. My email is on there, and you can follow our social media accounts and find us there as well. And I'm now going to turn it over to, we have Elizabeth Kent joining us, and she is the Executive Director at Victim Services Wellington. And I'll let Liz introduce herself, and you can take it away.
Hi, I'm Liz Kent. I'd just like to thank Women in Crisis and Crime Stoppers for inviting me to present tonight. I'm just going to give you a quick review of our services and overview. If you can just put up the next slide. So we have a 24-hour program. We have volunteers that attend on scene at the request of emergency services. So we work in a really close partnership with mostly it's police, but sometimes it's fire and paramedics. So if there's a victim on scene, they would give us a call and we would support that victim. So in a situation where it's a domestic, we actually do not go on scene to a lot of domestics. We usually do follow-ups with those individuals, unless the victim does want our services on scene. But because it's such a private and intimate experience, a lot of the times victims choose not to have us on scene. So we provide emotional support. We do an assessment to see what is needed. A lot of what we do is to we focus on safety planning, like Women in Crisis also does. We tend to do safety crisis fairly shortly after somebody discloses violence in the home. And then we'll work with the victim around. If we have a victim that calls us and has not gone to the police yet, we will work with the victim to explain what that process is like, what they can expect, what happens. We explain mandatory charging when it comes to domestics. We also will follow up around court information. So if there is a domestic, the police will notify the victim of the accused release, but we also get that information to follow up with the victim to review the bail conditions and explain what that means, and talk about referrals when it comes to court. We have an agency in town called Victim Witness Assistance Program. They provide court support to all domestic violence victims. We also, again, we talked about safety measures. If it's high risk, we will look at the MERS program. Ashley's on tonight from Guelph Police Service, and OPP, Christine. We talk, if it's high risk, we'll look at whether or not we have a device that identifies location if the person is high risk. And then we just advocate and do referrals. There is some domestics where we can do anywhere between 10 and 15 referrals. If they have children, if they have financial issues, if they have legal issues, if they have safety issues, if they have court issues, if they have family court issues. So it's pretty overwhelming. It's overwhelming to be in a domestic violence relationship, but it's also equally overwhelming to leave one. And I think that's really important for people to realize. And then we also have a program where we can access some financial assistance for people. Next slide. So to access our service, we can get referred by police, or people can call our number. We support both Guelph and Wellington County. If a referral comes through police, we send volunteers on scene if it's safe. But if they call the office, we look at what they need, whether it be, again, accommodations, whether it be financial, whether it be counseling. Right now, we have a new program that we've just started with Guelph Family Counseling and Support Services. And we have a psychotherapist 3 days a week for domestic violence victims. So if we get a referral and that person is open to attending some counseling, then we can set that up immediately. We're not waiting. And it takes the onus off the victim to call another agency. We can just make that referral and have them call the victim instead of the victim being responsible for calling. And then if the person has decided that they want to stay in the relationship, we can do safety planning around that if they plan on leaving. If they plan on leaving and they're referred to us, we tend to refer them to Women in Crisis, because Women in Crisis has the transitional program, and they really focus on having women leave in a safe, planned way. So we do a lot of referrals to Women in Crisis. Next slide. So our Victim Quick Response program is probably one of the programs that we can provide the most practical assistance. So if we have somebody, Jansen was mentioning, the shelter is operating at about a 50% capacity. Even before COVID, honestly, our shelters were full. Our shelters are full all the time. It's extremely difficult to get somebody into a shelter. And that's a really huge barrier. We do have a program that if we have somebody and there's no room in the shelter, we can put them in a hotel for a few nights until we find and problem solve where they can go. We can provide some basic needs. If there's safety concerns, a lot of the times in domestic violence, there's cell phones that get broken, or the police have to take the cell phones due to evidence. So if there's a safety concern and we need to provide the victim with a cell phone, we have cell phones that we can provide the victim with. Crime scene cleanup. So if there's been medical issues, we can do dental. If there's eyeglasses, those kind of things. So meals, we can provide meals. Again, if we have somebody, this is quite new, if we have somebody who's leaving and they need a storage locker for a period of time because they're leaving and they have to go to the shelter and they don't want to leave their belongings behind, we can provide a storage locker. Transportation. We've had victims who was high risk for them to be in Guelph, and they wanted to go to family in another area, so we can provide that transportation. So there's quite a few things. Safety is really how that program is looked at. So we have door jams for patio doors. We have window alarms to help people feel a little more secure. So that program provides a lot of really the basic needs that people need. The mobile emergency response program, that is basically an alarm that notifies police the latitude and longitude of where the victim is. If they push a button, it identifies them as a high risk. The police are notified ahead of time that this person is a high risk person. We work with both police, Wellington County OPP and Guelph City Police on this program. Yeah, it just gives them a really quick response. The one thing that's good about this is it's mobile, so they can still go grocery shopping, they can still go out in the general population and have quick access to police if needed. So I think one of the barriers around domestic violence, the biggest barrier I would say that we have is housing. It's really hard for people to decide to leave, especially if they have kids, to leave a violent situation and know that they're leaving, and they may not be able to find housing they can afford, or there's waiting lists for housing. As much as we're very lucky in Guelph and Wellington County, we have a lot of resources for domestic violence victims. It's a complicated system. There's a lot of different moving parts to it. So we kind of like to look at ourselves as kind of system navigators. So, we wouldn't be able to do what we do without our partners. Women in crisis provide shelter for victims. We don't provide shelter, but we make sure that the victims get to where they need to go. So kind of like the 411. And for those people who want to contact us, they can call us at Guelph at the number on the screen or the number in Wellington, the county. And that's my email address if anybody would like to contact me. And I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Now going to turn it over to Detective Sergeant Karen Ashmore and Detective Constable Christine Milson, who are joining us from the Wellington DP. I'll turn it to Karen.
You. Thank you so much, Jensen, and thank you so much for inviting us to this Realities and Resources session. And thank you, Sarah, for including us also. Jensen, I assume you'll just work the PowerPoint. And I don't want to be repetitive, and I know we went over, keep going, Jensen, a little bit more. And I don't want to be repetitive of the same things that have already been covered over the past on Tuesday and tonight. So maybe just go to what governs the police, which is page 11. There you go. So as was mentioned previously by Liz, there is a mandatory charge policy, and police are governed by the Criminal Code of Canada and Police Services Act and ministry directives. With the various inquests in relation to the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee, they will make recommendations to police, and that the May Isles inquest is what brought forth a mandatory charge policy. So it takes that ownership or that onus away from the victim and puts it on police that if there are grounds, you could change the slide. If there are grounds there, then we must lay a charge. So all our officers get training through the Ontario Police College and the OPP Police College, and as well, police services do training with community agencies such as yourself, like we're doing here, and we do in-house training should the need arise also, and that is all governed through adequacy standards and the way that police will investigate domestics. When police receive a call of a domestic, whether it's through the communications center or a 911 call, it will be treated as a high priority incident. In the case of 911 calls, it is mandatory for police to attend all 911 calls and ensure the safety of everybody involved. And police can enter a residence to make sure that that everybody in that residence is safe at the time of the call, or if they were met by someone at the door saying, no, I'm the only one here, they can search that residence and ensure the safety of everybody in that residence. When a victim contacts the communications unit, all the calls are recorded, and they'll ask questions that are relevant for the victim of the safety and the safety of the officers responding to these highly volatile situations. So there, and sometimes I've heard a lot of the recordings from domestic violence victims, and they'll be somewhat agitated because there's so many questions, but I think it's just understanding that for people responding to those calls too, we have to ensure their safety. So there is a lot of questions to ensure everyone's safety. What happened? Who's in the house? Is anybody under the influence of drugs or alcohol? Is anybody injured? So we could get the proper resources en route, as well as the police. You could change that, but yeah. Are there any weapons in the residence? Are there any firearms in the residence? Are there children present? Any court orders that are currently in effect? As I spoke about, that's the reason to do that at the onset, is to ensure that police arriving at the scene are in a place of, that is as safe as it could be, or they're going to a situation with awareness so we could respond appropriately. Ensure that we do have medical assistance if in fact we need to get that on the way, or bomb disposal, whatever we need at that time. And many times, well, not many, but there are times where the response will have to be heightened to a tactical response team, to set something that's more of an integrated response based on the situation. Once the police engage in an investigation, the victim and children, we would put in a place of safety and make sure that they're okay. What we like to do is take videotape statements of with the victim. There are some times when those will be KGB statements, and that is based on the fact that we know many times in investigations and many times in relationships, people go back. So, and through the courts, we've learned this, which is why we've implemented KGB statements. If there are children in the residence, it is police duty to report to children and family services that there are children in the residence or in the relationship. Even if a child is not present at that time, it is mandatory that we report to Child and Family Services that that child is part of the relationship, based on the fact that we know historically this is not the first time there's been an argument or some type of upset there. This is the first time the police have been called. So it's very important that the kids that don't have a voice, we ensure that the services are engaged, that they can make sure that any child in need of protection is taken care of. I know that sometimes that is very much a barrier for people contacting police, but I just, I'm very passionate about that because kids don't have a voice. And historically, we know that police won't be called until numerous times where there's been violence in a home. As I spoke about, there's mandatory charge policies. So if the officer, based on the totality of the situation, has the grounds to lay a charge and believes that an offense has been committed, then they shall make it clear that they will be laying a charge. Now, there's been many discussions about dual charging and a he said, she said situation. And that's why sometimes investigations are not completed. So the investigation could go through pulling the 911 tape, interviewing neighbors, interviewing the children. So it's not necessary or mandatory that the charge be laid immediately. You want everybody to be in a place of safety, but once that charge is laid, anyone who has concerns with the charge, the only person that to withdraw or amend a charge is the Crown Attorney. So once the charge is laid, then the victim, for any variance in the release conditions or charges, has to speak with the courts. Criminal charges are based on the totality of the situation, but they range from homicide to sexual assault, assault with a weapon, to numerous breaches of court orders from previous assaults. You could change that one, Jennifer. Intimidation, forceful confinement, mischief, trespass, criminal harassment, So we do see it's based on the totality of the situation, as well as many times someone will come in and after 10 years of a relationship. So there may be a historical fact in a lot of the charges that may be considered. For a lot of the very historical cases, we will consult with the Crown Attorney prior to laying a charge, just based on their responsibility to argue that case in the courts and ensuring that they have enough evidence in order to move forward. I spoke about breaches, peace bonds. Peace bonds can be applied through the justice of the peace. So people, well, barring COVID, can go see a family court judge to discuss such things as peace bonds, exclusive possession orders, and in relation to residents, custody issues. So you don't require the police in order to do that. People can go lay a private information and discuss that with duty counsel at the courts. Obstruct is in relation to trying to change the victim's mind, get them not to testify. So that's where it doesn't lie with the police to change any type of charges, that you have to go directly to the courts. In what year did the law change? 1983, which is quite alarming, really, when you think in 1983 that those changes only came into effect. And I think you touched on this a bit, Jensen, why victims don't report. And we as police know that if they've had other interactions with police, they're very concerned about coming forward. In terms of bail hearings, is the court process that happens if someone was held for bail. The court is involved in the release conditions. Various conditions can be no communication orders, not to attend residences, curfews, turn over firearms. You could change that one, Jensen. So there could be a number of conditions that are put on someone, and that is decided by the court. If someone is released by police, then the police can have similar conditions on a person in terms of no communication with the victim or witness, not to be to turn over their firearms, consume alcohol, and to remain in the jurisdiction or not to be in the jurisdiction. If the person is on conditions, has been released on a conditions, and there's a breach in those conditions, then they would be rearrested for a breach and held for bail in most cases. And there's been some variance to that with COVID regulations and that type of thing at this time, but it's more for us to say why we would release them as opposed to keeping them in custody. And I think safety planning, the police are directed to do what is called a risk factor form. And I don't know, I know Ashley's going to speak, and I don't want to kind of step on her toes if she was going to cover this off. So that has to do with safety planning and working with victim services and working with you guys to all engage the services that do a much better job at this than police do. So it's very important for us to engage with the resources within the community that we have available to us to provide those extra services to victims of crime. In terms of risk factors, the risk factors, which is a domestic violence questionnaire, was developed by the OPP Behavioral Sciences Unit and a direction from the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee. So if there are a number of questions, and a combination of them, any combination would help us to recognize that there would be an increased risk to the victim of repetition of the offense. And I can't say 100% that that's all the time, because sometimes disclosure might not come at that time. So the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee recommends this, and we continue with it because we're mandated by the police service. But it possibly could not change the outcome. So for us as police, we know that violence is not a private family affair, and we do our best to provide the best possible service to victims of crime, mostly by engaging the services that can really help and support those people. Any victim of domestic violence has, when the police attend, has the right to have the same gender police interviewer, right to interpreter, right to information on personal safety planning, they must be kept apprised of charges, release conditions, right to complete a victim impact statement, which can be read later through in the court process, and the right to be notified of the services available to them. And these services will assist in keeping them up to date on charges, release conditions, support them through the court process. Liz talked about the cell phones and the MERS alarm. Victim services is very instrumental in supporting numerous victims, especially we deal with our rural people, and because those supports are a little bit not in their backyard so much. So it's important because of the proximity to services that they have those extra things that can help them. And these community-based organizations are just some that we deal with depending on the situation, but the police have a mandatory victim services notification policy, which has really assisted us in supporting victims of crime. And it makes our job easier.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was very informative and very great. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. And now I'm going to turn it over to Detective Constable Ashley MacArthur, who's joining us this evening from the Guelph Police Service. Let her introduce herself and take it away.
Okay, you think after a year of this, I would catch on how to use the technology properly. I'm just gonna raise my desk. So, good evening. My name is Detective Constable Ashley MacArthur. I'm the High Risk Domestic Violence Coordinator for the Guelph Police Service. I do not have a presentation, and I thought I would jump on tonight simply to field some questions. And after listening to everyone speak, I think a good topic to start off on is just the fabulous relationship that we do have with these organizations that are present here tonight. I've worked as a police officer for the Guelph Police Service for 16 years, and I actually started 20 years ago now as a victim services volunteer. with Liz Kent. So, and I touch on that only to say to our audience listening that we are very fortunate in Guelph to have a police service that is very well connected with a lot of wonderful community services and a lot of wonderful agencies who are very passionate about the resources that they provide. And just to jump from there to, for anyone listening that is thinking about reporting or thinking about coming forward, wanting someone else to report, to know that the support doesn't stop once you've reported. And I think that can be a concern in the community, that you've come forward, the police have laid a charge under our mandate that was just very well articulated by the OPP about our enforcement policy, and that we shall arrest, but just the understanding that the support doesn't stop there. There's a lot of community engagement, and we do provide full circle support. Again, I think if we open it up for questions, I'm open to fielding some of the questions, some of the police jargon that was just represented in the last presentation. If we want to hash out sort of what some of these scenarios might look like, what some of these terms might mean, I think myself and the OPP would be open to providing some more context about, for example, mischief. What does a mischief charge look like? There's a lot of misconceptions to, well, we both own the family home, husband's upset, there's a verbal argument taking place, wife's backed against a door, and husband punches the door right beside the female's face. Sometimes there's some miscommunication in the community about, does that constitute a charge? It's his door. You're more than welcome to break your own property. Well, in a domestic violence situation, it would lead to charges. So that's just one example of a lot of gray area or a lot of misconceptions that may be out there in the community. I'm definitely open to fielding some questions, and we'll go from there.
We do have one question right now, which is maybe Ashley or Karen could explain what KGB is.
Okay, and I was actually thinking that might come up. So Karen might I think the simplest way to explain it, and the simplest way I explain it to my victims, is when a victim comes forward to the police, we are asking that they swear under oath that what they're telling us is the truth. It's not that we have any reason to believe that they would come forward not telling us the truth. It protects the integrity of our investigation, and it really sets the tone and an understanding that we're asking you to come forward, we're asking you to tell us the truth, and we explain to you up front the legal consequences of not telling the truth. Because if we move forward on an investigation and find out, in fact, that the information provided was not true, there are legal consequences to that. It's case law. It's based off of case law. I don't know if the OPP wants to step in and give some more information. That's how I like to provide it to my victims.
Hi, it's Karen. Yeah, great explanation there, Ashley. And I know that sometimes, and unfortunately, the legal preamble for us to read that to victims is quite lengthy and in many cases concerning, but also just there's a legality for us to read that to them, but also making them aware that, you know, we're doing this for, you know, to help them. And I think that's important to know, is that this is just part of the process, and that's the way the process has to be. And we're governed by regulations, and case law has governed us in order to do that. And it's also for their protection, right? So, and that's part of the mandatory charge policy, and putting that together with the KGB is just having, and it is very confusing, I think, to people, especially if it's their first interaction ever with police. It is confusing. So it's important to just take that time, and that's how we train our investigators, is to take that time and explain it in layman's terms, because we do have to read the preamble through. So
yeah, so to be very clear and for the public knowledge, KGB, it's not an acronym. My understanding, it's R versus and the last names that the case law is based on. Okay, so obviously a K, a G, a B. So as a result of this case law, a KGB statement has been formulated. And again, it's having a victim who comes forward acknowledging that, one, this statement that they're providing is being video and audio taped, that they consent to such tape being made. It's also explaining to them and having them understand the importance of telling the truth and the consequences of not telling the truth. And in a lot of detail, and unfortunately a lot of police jargon detail or criminal code detail, explaining what the consequences of that, of not telling the truth to police, could mean. And once that's understood, again, it protects the integrity of the investigation, and then we're able to move forward. And because their statement was taken under oath, able to provide the court with the best evidence.
Thank you so much for that, Ashley, and thank you, Karen. I see that we as well are getting some more questions in the chat, but I want to give space for Sarah to talk a little bit about Crime Stoppers, and then we will also be turning off the recording to answer some more questions at the end. So I just wanted to let folks know that. So if you do have questions and you do want to ask them to any of us, please feel free to put them in the chat anytime. And if you want to send a message directly to me, if you don't feel comfortable asking your questions, please feel free to do that as well in the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about Crime Stoppers Guelph Wellington. But in the meantime, feel free to put your questions in the chat till the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jensen. And I know I'm overwhelmed with the amount of information and just understanding on a deeper level what we can expect when police are involved with a domestic occurrence. So that's so very helpful. Was there anything past this for the presentation then? So just as we mentioned on Tuesday, we just want to reinforce that someone other than the criminal has information that can solve a crime, and no tip is too small. The biggest misconception with Crime Stoppers is that people think that Crime Stoppers is the police. The police are Crime Stoppers. So it's kind of a blurred line there that we're constantly trying to clarify. It's really important to understand that if you are wanting to reach out and report information about a crime, we always advocate to go directly to our police partners. We have a great relationship with both Guelph Police and Wellington County OPP, but we know that there could be a number of reasons why an individual might choose to report something anonymously and confidentially through Crime Stoppers. I also want to take this time just to indicate that if you were a victim of crime, so specifically domestic violence in this instance, we could not have you call Crime Stoppers because our police partners, the investigators, would have to know who the victim is. They would have to be able to conduct their investigation and contact the victim directly. So if you are a victim and you want to report this happening to you, we would have to have you contact the police partners directly. However, Crime Stoppers is uniquely created so that we're able to support family members, friends, those surrounding the victim who want to come forward, who want to help, who know this particular crime of domestic violence is happening, and they want to do something about it. In this particular example, neither the victim nor the accused would ever know who it was that brought forward the information. Again, our tipsters are anonymous, and I think that's really important to reinforce because some people hold back. They don't want to get involved, or they don't want to, further a problem with the relationship, or they don't want to lose a friendship if it's their friend that's being abused, or to have the accused turn their anger toward the tipster. So again, because the anonymity and the confidentiality, you're protected with Crime Stoppers. Okay, Jensen. We don't talk about the specific crimes that we help solve. Again, that would really put our tipsters in jeopardy. What we do talk about are the specific statistics that come as a result of our tips. So we started back in 1988, and through to the end of January of 2021, we've had over 22,000 tips to our program. This has resulted in more than 1,500 arrests. And to give an example, 723 drug occurrences have been solved as a result of Crime Stoppers tipsters. We've recovered more than $37 million in drugs, personal property, and cash. Unfortunately, we don't have a dollar value on a human life, so we're not able to attribute a value per se there. However, one would argue that saving a human life is priceless, and that's certainly how we would feel about that information. Charges as a result of Crime Stoppers tips, we've got over 4,300 of those, and we've cleared over 2,200 cases thanks to our investigative partners. Our board has approved rewards in excess of $173,000. As most people understand, Crime Stoppers does offer cash rewards for information that leads to an arrest. We have a 95% conviction rate currently with Crime Stoppers tips, and therefore that is why we offer those rewards at time of arrest rather than waiting until it goes through the court process. Thanks, Jensen. Like so many other organizations, we have been impacted by COVID-19. However, we are still open and taking tips 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are always anonymous and we are always confidential. We've pivoted to focusing on online engagement, such as we are here this evening, so that we can continue reaching out to our communities and letting people know, especially during this trying time, that we are still here for you, that our community partners are still here for you, and of course, our police partners are still here for you. So, it may feel lonely and you may feel isolated. However, we feel it's really important to keep this programming going, and you know that you can reach out to get support. I would encourage you to check us out online. We're very active on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We also have our website at www.csgw.tips. That's also how you can provide a web tip. There's two ways to report a tip, either 1-800-222-TIPS, which is 8477, or via our website at www.csgw.tips. Both are confidential and they're both available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay. Another misconception is that we're a business or that we received some type of government funding to pay our rewards. In both these cases, this is incorrect. Crime Stoppers is a not-for-profit charitable organization that relies on donations from private citizens, organizations, local businesses, and of course, fundraising activities. Those have taken a bit of a hit this year with COVID, but we still are trying to do our best to ensure that we have coffers in the bank so that we can pay our rewards to tipsters. Okay. We are structured with a board of directors, and this is very important. These are individuals from our community who want to give back. The volunteer civilian board of directors meets monthly. They maintain our partnerships with Wellington County OPP and Guelph Police Service. They approve the rewards that are offered to our tipsters. They also raise the funds which pay for these rewards, and most importantly, increase public awareness by promoting the program through their network of contacts. We have a number of awards. The reason we share this is to let the community know that the work we are doing is being recognized at the provincial level. Those provincial awards are on the left, and also at the international level, and you can see those on the right. This is really to increase confidence in the program and let people know that Guelph Wellington takes its Crime Stoppers program very seriously, and we're doing the best we can to increase awareness throughout the county and the city.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So just before we get to your questions, we wanted to thank you all so much for joining us this evening as our two-part series. We hope that you enjoyed it and found it helpful. And if you are seeking additional resources, trainings, information, my contact is on the screen there. You can reach me at Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis. And Sarah, where can folks find you?
Yes, so I can be reached through my email, sarah@csgw.tips, or you can go to our website, www.csgw.tips, and contact us. I get all those emails as well. And I want to take a moment, Jensen, to thank you for all the work you put into this 2-night session, as well as Elizabeth Kent and our partners at Wellington County OPP and Guelph Police Service. I really appreciate the time that you have all given us, and to provide this information to the community. I have a great sense of pride in our partnership, and I know we're going to have some feedback and a great question and answer session in a couple of minutes.